There are moments that do not feel like moments at all, but entire lifetimes compressed into a single breath of memory, a scream echoing across the ravaged hull of a battle-scarred world, the scent of burning promethium thick enough to coat the tongue, the rhythmic thunder of bolter fire becoming so familiar that silence itself feels alien, and then, darkness, not death, never death. The Emperor denies that final mercy to certain souls, to the heroes, to the broken, to the useful. I remember a field of shattered ceramite and blood-slick mud. I remember the sensation of my own heartbeat, slowing, failing, surrendering. I remember the apothecaries lifting my ruined form as though they were retrieving a relic rather than a man. I remember the chanting, the incense, the sarcophagus lid lowering, and the crushing realization that the last breath I took as a living warrior was not the end, but the beginning. I remember waking. I remember the machine waiting for me. I remember the machine was me, a hero entombed within a walking tomb, a soul grafted to adamantium sinew, a voice replaced by a vox grill's eternal roar. Glory without touch, purpose without choice, life without living. This is what it is to be trapped inside a dreadnought. I remember the ground trembling before I ever heard the first shell strike. The soil of that world was dark, clay packed heavy by centuries of unbroken storms, but beneath it was bedrock that carried vibrations like a drumskin stretched tight. The kind of trembling that crawled up through greaves into bone, telling you the enemy was coming long before you saw them. We had deployed in a valley scarred by abandoned manufactoria, their chimneys black spires stabbing at a sky already bruised by ash and burning propellant. The air tasted of iron and static, the signature flavor of warfare, familiar enough to calm the nerves of lesser men, but to those like us, Astartes, it was simply the scent of purpose made manifest. My brothers stood beside me, armored forms gleaming beneath banners weighed by ritual wax and battlefield grime. We bore the colors of our chapter, colors I still hold, though I can no longer feel the paint beneath my fingers. Our sergeant's voice crackled through the vox, confident and steady, the same tone he had taught us to trust since our first campaign. There was no fear among us, not because we believed we could not die, but because we believed death meant the completion of duty. Death was a final offering, an end to the oath. At that time, I still believed death was an end. I remember gripping my bolter. The casing was warm, the machine spirit within humming like a restrained predator. I could feel the tiny vibrations of the mechanism ready to unleash controlled bursts of explosive wrath. The gauntlet of my power armor flexed around the handle, servo muscles responding to instincts older than speech. The ground tremor grew stronger. Fox pings confirmed enemy approach. Our chaplain intoned a battle prayer, his Crozius raised toward the sky, and the thunder of our hearts unified into one silent roar. Then they came. A tide of green muscle and scrap metal plating, orcs, bellowing, chanting, firing weapons that sounded like the death rattle of a rusted engine choking on its own fury. Their war banners fluttered in the storm winds, crude glyphs painted in blood and grease, boasting strength without art, fury without restraint. They were a force of nature, ugly, unstoppable, inevitable in their advance. Yet we had faced far worse. We had broken Tyranid swarms. We had purged heretic warbands steeped in the madness of the war. By comparison, the Greenskins were crude, predictable, unrefined. We knew how to counter them. That was what we believed. We opened fire. Bolter rounds arced into the mass, detonating skulls, tearing limbs free from bodies still mid-charge. The air filled with the bursts of explosive shells, each impact a punctuation mark in the language of extermination. My armor's autosenses filtered smoke into spectral outlines, tracking movement, marking trajectories. I moved with precision, each shot placed exactly where needed, as though guided by some silent instinct carved into my bones during gene forging and war hymn conditioning. The orcs kept coming. I remember the weight of impact as they crashed upon us. A knob barreled into me, towering, its breath hot and foul, stinking of raw meat and burned oil. Its cleaver, crudely forged yet monstrously heavy, struck my pauldron and sent shockwaves down my arm. I staggered, only for training to reclaim control. I fired point blank. The bolter roared. Flesh and bone erupted. The knob fell. Around me, my brothers fought like demigods carved from myth. Every movement was a killing arc. Every chant from the chaplain was a forge hammer ringing against our souls. We were winning. We always won. That was the truth we believed was immutable. Then the sky split, a sound like the world cracking apart, a shadow descending, something massive. I turned, autosenses attempting to compensate, a deaf dread, its saw blades shrieking, its pilot laughing with a madness only orcs could produce. The machine was a walking abattoir, a monument to brutality hammered together from wreckage and war trophies. It crashed into our line like a collapsing fortress. I remember lunging. I remember shouting a battle cry so loud it tore my throat raw inside the helm. I raised a crack grenade, intending to jam it into the beast's armor seams. My timing was perfect. My strike was true. But the machine was faster. Its claw, massive and rusted, closed around my torso. I felt the armor strain. Ceramite cracked. Ribs snapped. Organs ruptured. There is no word for that sensation. Pain does not describe it. Pain is something the mind can try to endure. This was annihilation. Total, absolute. The world collapsed into a point of red fury and then faded into cold static. I fell. Or perhaps I was thrown. I do not remember landing. I remember only darkness creeping like oil across my vision, drowning out the battlefield, drowning out my brother's voices, drowning out the universe itself. And somewhere in that fading void, I thought, so this is death. I was wrong. The darkness did not stay silent. There was no peaceful drift into whatever waits beyond the veil of mortality. Instead, the black was pierced by sound, distant, muffled, yet unmistakable. Voices. Not the disciplined cadence of my battle brothers, nor the guttural howls of the greenskins. These were practiced tones, clipped and precise, accompanied by the hiss of incense burners and the whir of servo arms. I floated somewhere between awareness and absence, as though tethered to my own fading existence by threads woven of pain and stubborn will. I could not move, I could not speak, yet I felt everything, not as sensation but as knowledge. The knowledge that I still existed when I should not have, that breath still came, shallow and irregular, that my gene-forged heart still beat, weak and faltering, that my body was no longer whole. I hovered beneath the surface of consciousness while the tech marines worked. I heard them reciting the rites of reclamation, their voices carrying the weight of ritual older than memory. The smell of sacred oils and burning sanctified unguents filtered into the darkness. Something heavy and metallic clamped around my chest. Not armor, but restraint. Not to contain strength, but to prevent it from tearing itself apart from its own dying convulsions. His vitals are unstable. He is too valuable to be allowed to die. Prepare the sarcophagus. Sarcophagus. That word alone nearly drew me fully awake. The syllables echoed like a funeral bell tolling for me and me alone. A sarcophagus is not a bed. It is not a recovery chamber. It is a coffin, a vessel for what remains when life has ended. Was I dead? I tried to remember the battlefield, the orc war machine, the crushing force, the sound of bones snapping like twigs beneath a boot. I should have died. I know that. The Codex teaches that all warriors eventually bleed their last. I had accepted that fate with the clarity of purpose given to all Astartes, but the Emperor does not release his tools so gently. I surged back into my body with sudden clarity. Pain flooded in like a tide breaking through a shattered dam. It was incandescent, a blistering agony that did not exist in any language, because no world had ever needed a word for torment of such magnitude. I would have screamed if my throat had obeyed me. Instead, the scream tore only through my mind, a silent howl lost in the choked confines of failing nerves. Voices rose in chanting. Servo arms moved. I was lifted, my body weightless, or perhaps simply beyond the point of registering touch. I could not see, but I knew where I was being taken. Every Astartes knows. It is one of the unspoken fates whispered only after victories, when the fire burns low and the new recruits have slept. The sarcophagus of a dreadnought. Not all heroes are laid to rest. Some are kept. My world became light, blinding white, cutting through the darkness like a blade. I saw robed figures in red and black, their faces masked with lenses and rebreathers, their hands replaced by augmetics that gleamed with sacred oils. Tech marines. Their movements were precise, reverent, as though handling a relic of divine significance rather than the broken ruin of a warrior who once had a name. I tried to speak. My lips did not respond. Only the faintest rasp escaped my throat, barely a sound at all. One of them leaned close, his vox grill crackling. "Be still. You have been chosen." Chosen. As though I had been granted some sacred honor. As though this was a blessing. I felt the sarcophagus behind me before I saw it, a massive cradle of armor plating, cables like veins, adamantium walls polished to a dull, sanctified sheen. The interior was lined with neural sockets, nutrient conduits, life support rigs, and restraints. Restraints not to protect the occupant, but to ensure the occupant could never leave. My broken form was lowered into it. The metal was cold, not the simple chill of steel left untouched. No, this cold sank into marrow, into thought, into identity. It was the cold of an ending disguised as continuation. The lid began to descend. Through the narrowing slit of light, I saw the chaplain approach. His skull helm was framed by burning candles. His crozius rested across his chest. He spoke a litany of honor, of pride, of sacrifice. The words were noble. They were meant to comfort, but beneath them I heard something else. Pity. Then the seal locked, and the light was gone. Darkness was no longer absence. It was now occupied, filled with the low, rhythmic pulse of machines working in place of organs. The sarcophagus embraced me like a shell forged from inevitability. I could not tell where my ruined flesh ended and the cold interfaces of the machine began. The boundaries blurred, not physically at first, but in the deeper portion of awareness where identity resides. I wanted to move. I wanted to shift even the smallest muscle just to prove to myself that I remained something more than cargo sealed in an armored crate. But the body, what remained of it, refused to obey. I was encased not only in adamantium, but in the helplessness of a form that no longer belonged to me. Sound reached me next. Not through ears, those I realized with a hollow certainty were likely gone, but through vibrations passed into the sarcophagus chamber itself. The voices of the tech marines had changed timbre, no longer performing the rites of binding, but those of awakening. Their words were half chant, half technical command, a marriage of faith and engineering that only the Adeptus Astartes and their priest-smiths could make sacred. Pistons hissed as coolant flowed, neural fiber bundles connected. I felt a pressure at the base of my skull, like a door being unlocked from the inside. Then the machine spirit stirred. Its presence was not a mind nor a voice, nor anything shaped in the familiar contours of mortal thought. It was instinct given architecture, animal awareness refined into purpose. It regarded me with the same silent appraisal that a predator grants another predator sharing its territory. There was no malice, there was no welcome, only cohabitation forced by necessity. It did not speak, yet I understood it. I was not alone, and I would never be alone again. Something entered me, not physically, but through the neural links. A surge of data, images, memories not my own. The machine spirit had known battle long before my body was broken. It had torn open bunkers, shattered war engines, endured bombardments that might have killed entire regiments of the Astra Militarum. I saw those battles flicker through my mind like lightning at the horizon, too distant to comprehend fully, too immediate to ignore. Time lost meaning. I could not tell whether hours passed or mere moments. A voice broke through the static, sharp and commanding. "Brother, hear me." It was the chaplain. His tone was softened, though his words held the weight of sacred duty. The Vox link carried resonance into the sarcophagus chamber, making his voice feel as though it were inside my skull. "You have not been forsaken. You endure because the chapter endures. You serve because the Emperor requires your service still. Death cannot claim you, not yet." I tried to speak. I reached for my voice the way a drowning man reaches for a surface that has already receded into the depths. A crackling hiss of broken sound escaped the Vox, nothing more. The chaplain did not pause. He knew this struggle. He had witnessed it before. "You shall rise again," he continued, "not as you once were, but as something greater. A warrior eternal, a guardian of our legacy, a dreadnought of the chapter." There it was, the truth spoken plainly. A part of me rejected it instantly, not in anger, but in grief. Grief deeper than any battle loss or fallen brother. I understood then that death had not been the end I expected. It had been stolen from me, my sacrifice incomplete, my rest denied. I was to return to the battlefield, but as a prisoner of survival, bound inside armor thicker than hope and heavier than memory. The sarcophagus locks released, not to free me, but to connect me. A surge of power coursed through the neural interfaces. My awareness expanded outward. I felt limbs, not flesh and bone, but pistons and adamantine plating. I felt weight, not the familiar load of armor and gear, but the mass of a war machine capable of leveling walls and turning infantry lines into dust. It was not movement, not yet, but the potential for movement, the invitation of power restrained. I realized something then, with a clarity sharp enough to wound. I would walk again. I would kill again. I would never feel the ground beneath my feet again. The chaplain placed his palm against the sarcophagus exterior. I felt nothing, yet I knew the gesture was there. "Brother," he said, his voice resonating like a benediction and a sentence in the same breath, "awake. There is still war to be done." And the machine answered in my stead. A rising hum, a growl of reactors stirring, a breath not drawn but generated. I did not die that day on the battlefield. I came very close. Death would have been merciful. This was purpose. This was eternity. This was the beginning. If you find yourself walking beside me through this memory of metal and fire, then remain. Your attention is the only warmth left to me, and if this story holds weight upon your spirit, lend it voice, share it, and allow it to echo beyond this moment so others might understand the cost of immortality. The first time I awoke inside the Dreadnought shell, I mistook the sensation for dreaming. Not a mortal dream of landscapes or memory, but the disjointed fragments of awareness that linger in the moment between consciousness and oblivion. There was no up, no down, no sense of body or place, only the slow coalescing of existence. A faint hum filled my awareness, steady and tireless like the heartbeat I no longer felt. The machine's core reactor pulsed with a rhythm that almost resembled life, and for a single fleeting moment I thought I could surrender myself to it, dissolve into it, let it carry me like a river bearing a broken vessel downstream. But clarity returned like a blade driven into the skull. I was not drifting, I was confined. The sarcophagus interior was a cradle of pressure and containment. Tendrils of neurointerface cables spread across the remnants of my spine, my skull, my chest, fusing nerve to circuitry, thought to relay. Regeneration fluids pumped through feeding lines that entered what remained of my veins. The machine did not replace my body, it consumed it, used it as the anchor from which to articulate its vast frame. My flesh no longer housed movement, it simply authorized it. The Tech Marine's chants echoed faintly, filtered through both auditory channels and neural resonance. Their voices layered with metallic undertones, as though the machine spirit itself listened and responded in tones too low for human organs to perceive. Each invocation was not prayer alone, but calibration, a ritual of alignment between two unwilling partners bound together by necessity. I was not asked to accept. The machine was not asked to yield. We were joined regardless. I could feel the sarcophagus walls around me, though I could not touch them. It was proximity without contact, awareness without sensation. My world was a tomb that allowed no motion, no shift in weight, no breath. Even my pain was distant now, not because it had faded, but because there was too much of it for the mind to process. The body had surrendered, and the machine numbed what the spirit could not bear. Then the memories came, not mine, but the machine's. They streaked across my mind without sequence or context, a fortress wall collapsing under my fists, the stench of scorched ceramite, a plasma blast carving a crater where an arm had once been, the roar of a crowd of soldiers chanting a name I did not know. Victory after victory, war after war. I saw centuries of battles, campaigns fought before my birth, before the veterans who trained me had earned their scars, before even the chapter masters who shaped our history had drawn their first breaths. The machine had lived countless lives, I had lived one. Now we were expected to exist as a single being. There was no comfort in shared memory, only dissonance, a jarring collision between flesh-born instincts and engineered purpose. My mind recoiled. I tried to remember the face of my sergeant, the call sign, of my squad, the cadence of our war chants. They felt distant, blurring at the edges, fraying like banners left too long in the acid rain of some toxic world. For the first time I feared something more than death. I feared forgetting. A sound pierced the haze. Not the Tech Marines, not the machine. Something familiar. "Brother, hear me." The chaplain's voice again. It resonated through Vox channels tuned now directly to my mind. His words did not strike my ears. They unfolded inside my awareness, impossible to ignore. "You endure by the Emperor's will. You are not alone. You are never alone. The chapter stands with you." I wanted to believe him. Of all things, I wanted that to be true. But the machine spirit's silent presence pressed behind my thoughts, absolute and immovable. There was no companionship in it, no camaraderie, only purpose. "I am here," I tried to say. The intention formed cleanly. The execution did not. The Vox emitted a fractured growl, raw, distorted, inhuman. The sound startled me more than the pain that followed. It was the sound of something that lived beyond the boundaries of flesh. The chaplain did not flinch. He placed a gauntleted hand upon the Dreadnought's armored shell, and though I could not feel the touch, I knew it. "You will learn to speak again," he said. He believed it. I did not. The machine did not. The sarcophagus closed its grip a little tighter, not a physical shift, but a psychological one, a reminder. My life was no longer mine. War awaited, time lost meaning inside the sarcophagus. Days could have passed, or minutes, or years. There were no sunrises to mark the passage of hours, no breathing rhythm to measure the tempo of life. Even the beating of my heart, a sound that had once been a constant reassuring thunder beneath armor, was replaced with the muted cycling of nutrient pumps and reactor pulses. What remained of my flesh existed now only as a substrate, a relic buried beneath metal and expectation. I did not inhabit my body any longer. I haunted it. The Tech Marines came often. Their steps were always measured, deliberately heavy as though to remind the machine spirit that they approached with authority, not fear. The Omnissiah's sigils hung from their robes, engraved onto armor plates and inscribed into augmetics. Each gesture was a ritual, each adjustment a prayer. They spoke to the machine spirit in Binharic hisses and pulsing bursts of technoglossia that rippled through my awareness like cold static. I did not understand the words, but I understood their intention. Appeasement. They did not command the machine. They negotiated with it. Once, I believed strength meant dominance. That to be powerful was to impose one's will upon the world. The sarcophagus taught me the truth. Survival is submission, not surrender, but coexistence. A hard truth carved into the marrow of eternity. I was aware when the chaplain returned, though I did not see him. The sarcophagus had no windows. It had no doors. There was nothing of the world beyond unless granted by the machine spirit or the operators tending me. And yet, when the chaplain's presence entered the chamber, I felt it, like a warmth radiating through layers of steel and ceramite. "Brother?" he said, his voice steady as bedrock. "Your service is not ended. You will continue to carry the honor of the chapter." Honor. The word settled upon me like dust. Light, weightless, yet suffocating when enough of it gathered. I remembered honor on the battlefield, earned by devotion, sacrifice, triumph. But this felt like honor imposed. Something given not as recognition, but as a chain. I tried again to speak. The machine spirit watched, impassive. I formed the intention carefully, shaping it as I once shaped war cries that shook the confidence of foes. I reached toward the Vox systems embedded in the sarcophagus wall, directing thought to frequency, to resonance, to release. The sound that emerged was a grinding rumble, like stone dragged across stone, a tortured echo of language, a sound the chaplain recognized not by clarity, but by effort alone. "Yes," he said softly, "not triumph, not encouragement, acceptance." He knew what I was becoming, or rather, what I was losing. I wanted to ask him how many had come before me, how many brothers now walked the halls as eternal engines of war, memories eroded by time, identity diluted in the machine's endless hunger. I wanted to ask if their souls still remained within those steel shells, if they dreamed, but the words would not form, thought and sound no longer followed the same pathways. I could want, but wanting no longer guaranteed expression, so I asked the only question I could. Why? Not in sound, not in speech, in silence. And the chaplain answered, "There are wars that do not end. There are foes who rise again and again. There are moments when the strength of living warriors is not enough, and so the Emperor, in his boundless wisdom, has provided a way for heroes to rise beyond death itself." I would have laughed once. Before the sarcophagus, before eternity's weight settled in my chest like an anchor, the Emperor's wisdom, the Emperor's will, words spoken with reverence by those who never feel their consequences. The machine spirit shifted, not physically, but in its presence, its attention, its pressure against my thoughts. It did not approve of doubt, or perhaps it simply recognized doubt as inefficiency. In that moment, I understood something with perfect clarity. Faith is easy for those who can walk away. The chaplain rested his hand upon the sarcophagus one last time before he left. "You will awaken soon," he said. "When the chapter calls, you will answer." The chamber door sealed, the lights dimmed, the machine spirit waited, and I understood there would be no more sleep, only the long, unbroken awareness of a prison made sacred. The first time they connected me to the Dreadnought frame, I was not prepared. The sarcophagus was not the Dreadnought, it was only the core, the heart, the tomb. But the shell, the towering form of ceramite, adamantium, hydraulics, and weapons forged for siege-breaking war, that was a body unto itself. When the Tech Marines initiated the coupling sequence, I felt it like a sudden widening of my own existence. One moment I was confined to a coffin of metal and memory. The next I became something vast. Weight. Tremendous weight. Not heavy in the sense that flesh understands, but significant. A presence that pressed not on muscle and bone, but on identity itself. I became aware of limbs. The massive arms fitted with Stormbolter and Power Fist, each larger than a mortal soldier. I felt the anchoring stabilizers along the legs, pistons capable of crushing ferrocrete foundations into rubble. I felt the armored plates, the layered shielding, the reinforced chassis that had endured artillery barrages without yielding. Yet I did not control them. I inhabited them. The Tech Marines guided my awareness through the neural lattice, calibrating impulses, adjusting thresholds, limiting access. My thoughts reached outward, and the machine answered not with obedience but with caution, like a predator allowing a small degree of contact before deciding whether to bite. "Synchronize respiration patterns," one Tech Marine intoned. "The machine had no lungs." "Synchronize heartbeat," another said. "The machine had no heart. The commands were for me, not it. They were asking me to match what remained of my biological rhythms to the machine's cycle, to erase the dissonance, to merge. I resisted, not consciously, not as rebellion, but with the primal instinct of something that still remembered warmth. I clung to the memory of breath, of running, of the thrum of blood in veins. The machine responded with patience at first, soft pulses, gentle feedback, then firmness, pressure, a silent insistence. Yield. Something in me shivered, not physically, but deep within the part of the mind where the awareness of self resides. I understood then why some do not survive this stage. Not because their bodies fail, those are tended meticulously, not because their minds break, though many do. It is because there comes a moment where a choice is made, whether willingly or through erosion, to remain a man trying to control a machine, or to become a warrior who is the machine. The chaplain returned during the synchronization, his chant steady and unwavering, a lighthouse in the storm of merging identity. He spoke the oaths of service, the lineage of our chapter, the names of those who had borne this duty before me. I recognized none of the names, though thousands had spoken mine during the rites. It struck me then with a hollow and piercing clarity. In time, my name would be forgotten as well. Not erased, not dishonored, simply absorbed, spoken less often, replaced by a title, a role. Dreadnoughts are not remembered as individuals. They are remembered as instruments, their histories recorded as footnotes under campaign logs, their legacies measured by tonnage of enemies slain, by fortresses reduced to rubble, by worlds pacified through their relentless advance. I would live long enough to watch those who remembered me fall to age, battle, or time. I would outlast every brother who had fought beside me. I would watch generations rise, salute me, revere me as a relic of heroism they could not understand. They would speak my name with reverence and with distance, because how could they love something that could not die? A low hum resonated through the chassis. The machine accepted synchronization. My limbs, the machine's limbs, shifted, slowly, stiffly, like an ancient colossus waking from its slumber. The chamber rumbled, sparks fell from cable conduits. Incense smoke curled around the form I now inhabited. I expected to feel awe, or fear, or perhaps gratitude. Instead, I felt something colder, finality. The chaplain's voice was soft when he spoke next. "You walk again, brother." I did, but not as I was. The tech marines sealed the sarcophagus fully into place. The last physical connection between me and the world of the living was closed. A hiss of pressurized locks, a final clang of certainty. I was no longer recovering. I was installed. A relic, a weapon, a prisoner granted motion. The machine spirit acknowledged me, not as equal, not as stranger, but as occupant. There would be war soon. The first march was not battle, it was a proving. The forge vault doors parted with a groan that reverberated through the Dreadnought chassis and into the marrow of what remained of me. I emerged into a vast hangar bay lit by lumen strips that cast cold, unwavering light. Servitors moved along rails overhead, sparks cascading around them like falling embers as they maintained aircraft, armor, and weapons of war. The air was thick with machine oil and incense, the sacred perfume of the Imperium. Skitari cohorts moved in disciplined formations across gantries, their red cloaks trailing behind them like banners of dried blood. And there, standing in silent rows before me, my chapter. They had come not as comrades, but as witnesses. I towered over them now. The smallest among them could have stood beneath my forward plating like a child beneath the shadow of a statue. They looked up at me with expressions my sensors could not fully read. Awe, reverence, sorrow, each blended into the next. They saluted in perfect unison, fists striking breastplates with the sound of thunder rolling across metal planes. My designation was spoken aloud, not my name. "Dreadnought of the Third Company," the Master of Sanctity intoned. "He rises again." The words echoed through the chamber. I felt them resonate in the frame that housed me. Not because the machine understood, no, it cared nothing for ceremony, but because something within me recognized that a chapter of my life had definitively ended. No one stepped forward to greet me, no brother clasped my arm, no veteran spoke my name in quiet remembrance. This was not reunion, this was presentation. A war machine completed, a relic awakened, a symbol restored. I tried to see their faces as I once had. I tried to find the ones I knew. I searched for my sergeant, the one who taught me to grip bolter and blade as though they were extensions of the will rather than tools of destruction. I searched for my squad brothers, those who had stood shoulder to shoulder in the mud, in the fire, in the horrors of close-quarters combat where the difference between life and death was measured in heartbeats. They were there, but they were no longer mine. I realized then that time had already begun its work. I recognized their armor, I recognized their heraldry, but something was missing, subtle yet devastating. They had aged, their voices had deepened, their posture had shifted. Scars marked armor that had once been unblemished. Experience had shaped them further in my absence, and I had not stood beside them to earn the same shaping. I had not walked with them through those battles. I had died instead. There was a pause, long, solemn, and then the order came. Advance. The machine spirit welcomed the command. It surged forward with a certainty that startled me. My steps thundered across the deck plating, each impact sending vibrations through the steel and into the marrow of the fortress monastery. The world did not recoil. The world accepted it. I moved with the weight of inevitability, and yet, inside that stride, I felt something deeply wrong. I was walking, but I was not moving myself. The sensation was like ghost limbs, like reaching for fingers that were no longer there, and feeling instead a hulking mass respond with crushing force. I thought the word walk, and the machine interpreted it as advance to the specified coordinate with optimal energy expenditure. There was no grace, no instinct, only function. The master of the forge observed every step, every calculated motion, marking adjustments on a data slate with the care of a high artisan. He was not watching me, he was watching the weapon. The chaplain, however, watched me. His gaze did not follow the machine, it followed the sarcophagus, it followed the presence inside. Yes, there will be war, he said through the Vox link. His voice was not triumphant, it was not eager, it was simply true. And we will call upon you, as we always have, as we always will. The hangar door opened to reveal the void beyond, the stars cold and eternal. I remembered seeing stars from the eyes of a living man. They had felt vast then, hopeful, endless in possibility. Now they looked like chains, because every star was a battlefield, and I would walk every one of them, not as a brother, not as a man, but as a relic of war, as a ghost given engines and armor, as a memory wearing steel. Continue? The first deployment came sooner than any of them spoke aloud. The chapter did not rouse a dreadnought except in dire need. I knew this before entombment. Every Astartes does. To awaken one of us was to admit that the situation had slipped beyond conventional measure, that the blade of the chapter had dulled, or that the enemy had brought something vast, immovable, or monstrous enough to demand a titan made of memory and steel. The strike cruiser translated from the warp with a shudder that rippled through the hull and into the dreadnought frame. I felt it. Not physically, but through the harmonics of the machine spirit, which responded to the warp's touch with a low growl as though it recognized the predatory nature of unreality and braced itself against it. The void shields shimmered, the vessel steadied. My awareness expanded outward, as if the ship itself breathed into me. We were in orbit over a world of flame. It had once been an imperial agri-settlement, vast plains for harvest, wind-scoured fields dotted with grain silos and habitation structures. Now it was a tapestry of burning trenches, bombardment craters, and bodies left where they fell. A planetary distress signal cut through the static, repeating as though in mockery of hope. My brothers assembled within the drop bay. Their armor was immaculate, ritual polished, purity seals fresh, lenses sealed against particulate corrosion. I remembered preparing for battle in the same way. I remembered tightening the straps on my gauntlets, adjusting my helm seals, reciting the litany of readiness. Now I lay suspended in the cradle of deployment rigging, held upright by locking braces that made mockery of standing. I did not prepare for battle anymore. I was prepared. The chaplain stood before me, Crozius held across his chest. No audience now, no witnesses, only us. His voice came through the internal vox, close, as though he stood at the threshold of my mind. "Brother," he said, "you will be the pillar, the unbreakable. Our line will form around you." Once, those words would have filled me with pride. Now they felt like a chain. I answered, not in words, but through readiness signals transmitted by the machine spirit, a flicker of light across a display, a calculated shift of power through the gyro stabilizers, a silent declaration, "I am active, I am able, I will move when commanded." The drop bay sirens wailed, retaining clamps disengaged, the entire deck trembled beneath the force of atmospheric entry thrusters, then gravity asserted itself. We fell. The drop pod was not designed for comfort, it was a projectile fired from orbit. In the living days I had knelt in those steel capsules with my squad, feeling the heat build, hearing the hull screech, exchanging wordless glances that carried more promise and certainty than scripture. Now I stood locked into the pod's reinforced cradle, unable to bow my head, unable to brace, unable to pray. The descent was a scream of atmosphere tearing against ceramite. Flames licked the viewing slits, thin strips of reinforced glass that revealed only distortion and smoke. When we struck ground, the impact was seismic. The drop pod slammed into the earth with enough force to shatter mortal bone 10 times over. The stabilizers absorbed it. The machine spirit exhaled through venting hydraulics. The pod doors detonated outward. Smoke, wind, the smell of burnt grain and promethium. Screams both human and inhuman. The battlefield stretched before me, a churning sea of orcs, their silhouettes marked by crude armor plates and jagged glyphs, their roars vibrating the air. The living would have surged forward. I did not surge. I advanced. Each step was a hammerstroke. Each footfall crushed earth, debris, and bodies beneath it. My assault cannon spun to life, barrels rotating faster than any human eye could track. Rounds poured forth in a torrent, each one bursting inside its target, spraying bone and viscera into the wind. The machine spirit leaned into the recoil like a beast, savoring the kill. My brothers moved around me with grim precision. They were fast, fluid, alive. I was not fast, I was not fluid, I was inevitable, and the orcs learned what inevitability meant. Their charges broke against me like waves against a cliff. Their gunfire pinged harmlessly across my armor. Their war cries faltered. Their courage, such as it was, wavered at the sight of something that could not fall, could not bleed, could not be stopped. And yet, as I waded through bodies and fire, I felt nothing. No surge of triumph, no fire of righteousness, no joy of battle, only duty, only continuation. only the ceaseless grinding march of purpose without end. In life, battle had been a proving of will. In this existence, battle was simply another form of breathing. The battle did not end quickly. Orcs rarely allowed such mercy. They fought with a kind of animal certainty, unyielding, relentless, not out of strategy, but because they simply did not comprehend the possibility of defeat. They charged not to win, but because charging was what they were made to do. Their war cries thundered across the plains, shaking the smoke-thick air. The sky dimmed with clouds of ash and dust kicked into the atmosphere by artillery detonations. The world became noise, motion, and the endless push of bodies meeting bodies. I moved through it all like a storm given shape. The assault cannon roared until its barrels glowed red. Shell casings the size of a mortal child's hand spilled across the ground in glimmering piles. When the belt ran dry, my secondary weapon came alive, a power fist that crackled with the contained fury of a subcore generator. I tore through war engines and the towering brutes that piloted them. Metal screamed, bones splintered, flesh burst into fragments that rained back to the scorched soil, and all the while the machine spirit whispered behind my thoughts, not in words, in impulses, in nudges, in the faint suggestion of movement before I consciously directed it. Aim higher, step left, crush, advance. We were not separate. We were no longer two. We were one. But that unity was not harmony. It was struggle, a constant grinding contest of will and function. I did not want to yield my identity fully. The machine spirit did not want to diminish its authority. We coexisted because the battlefield allowed no alternative. War forced us into alignment the way fire tempers iron. There came a moment, brief but unmistakable, where I paused in the carnage. Not because the enemy had relented, but because my brothers had surged ahead, clearing the field before me. A Skitarii broadcast tower flickered with Vox signal relay on the horizon, its structure damaged, its red signal light pulsing like a heartbeat. The wind swept across the plains, carrying with it the stench of death and the crackling of fires devouring what had once been crops that sustained thousands. The world was quiet in that instant, and in the quiet I felt it. Emptiness. Not the emptiness of loss. That had been felt already, and often, not the emptiness of grief that had dulled under the relentless tide of purpose. This was something deeper, a void where sensation should have been. I stood among the dead, surrounded by my brother's war cries echoing over Voxnet, and I felt nothing. Victory meant nothing. Survival meant nothing. War itself no longer stirred the blood, because I no longer had blood to stir. I realized with cold clarity that I could continue like this forever, campaign after campaign, planet after planet, century after century, long after these brothers fell and new ones rose to take their place, long after my name faded from the memory of those who had served beside me, long after every scarred banner of this war was dust. I would remain, not because I wanted to, because I existed. A shout pierced the Vox, not a command, a name. My name. One of the younger Astartes, the paint on his armor still relatively unworn, the edges of his pauldron still sharp from the manufactorum, stood at my side. His helm was off. His face, grim yet bright with the certainty of youth, was turned upward toward my towering frame. He bore the same company sigil I had once carried, the same oath script etched along his breastplate. He spoke my name again. Not the designation, not the role, not the title, my name. And for a moment, only a moment, I remembered the man I had been. I remembered the battlefield where I had laughed beside my brothers. I remembered the sensation of gripping a bolter with hands that could feel the texture of its grip. I remembered the warmth of victory shared among comrades. But the moment passed, because memory is not restoration. The machine spirit did not acknowledge the interruption. It waited, patient, unchanging, eternal. War resumed. I advanced. The young warrior moved with me, but he could not understand the weight of what walked beside him. He saw a hero, a legend, a living relic. He did not see the prison. He did not hear the silence. He did not feel the eternity. He would, one day, if he was unfortunate enough to survive. The assault cannon spun up again. The battle continued, and I marched because marching was all that remained. Time is not linear within the sarcophagus. It collects differently. It settles. It sifts. Moments do not drift forward and away like water coursing down a stream. They stack, layer upon layer, like dust on a sealed tomb. I do not remember years as years. I remember them as battles, campaigns, recoveries, rearming rituals. The cycle repeats with such rhythm that eventually one no longer distinguishes the steps from one another. War, vault sleep, war again. Rest is not rest. It is simply the absence of motion, a suspension of awareness inside metal that never cools, never softens, never allows the luxury of forgetting. It was during one of these void dream states that I first heard the echoes, not voices in the sense of words, not ghosts in the sense of spirits, but fragments, splinters of thought that did not originate from me. At first it was emotion, raw, formless, heavy, a pulsing undercurrent of hunger for battle, rage sharpened to a luminous edge. Purpose without question. It was the machine spirit, its consciousness primal and vast, shaped by centuries of war. Its memories came not as stories, but as instincts, wearing the shape of sensation. A fortress city collapsing under bombardment, the crunch of heavy plating underfoot, the thunder of guns so large they blurred hearing into a single continuous roar. I saw none of this with eyes. I felt none of it with flesh. The machine remembered itself, and it let me witness in the way a predator allows a smaller creature to watch the kill it cannot claim. But then there were other echoes, quieter, human, names spoken in reverent tones, voices reciting command strings, litanies of repair, the murmuring of tech marines who had tended this sarcophagus before I was ever lowered into it. Their memory did not linger as knowledge or message, only tone, only emotion worn smooth by time. And beneath that, deeper, something else. Not human, not machine. Something in between. The memory of another occupant. I did not hear his voice. I did not know his name. The chapter records had been thorough in their erasure, not out of disrespect, but tradition. A dreadnought is not a man, but a legacy. The individual is subsumed into service. His identity becomes function. His purpose becomes eternal. And yet, a feeling lingered. Loneliness. Not like mine. Sharp. Fresh. Cauterized at the edge of loss. This was ancient. Settled. Accepted. He had been here long enough for longing to erode into quiet endurance. It did not frighten me. It did not comfort me. It simply was. Over time, the echoes grew clearer, not in meaning, but in presence. Like a distant choir one knows exists, though no hymn can be clearly made out. Sometimes it was as though the machine spirit remembered the former warrior's impulses, his preferred angles of attack, his favored pace of advance, his instinct to shield rather than strike. At other times it was as though he merely watched, observing my choices with no judgment, only patience. A torch passed across centuries. Once, during battle, I felt his presence with sudden clarity. The war was brutal, the ground slick with churned mud and blood. Enemy armor had formed a defensive line, and my brothers had been forced into cover. The machine spirit surged, eager to break the stalemate by sheer force. I wanted to advance, to crush, to rend, but someone held the machine in check. A whisper of memory. Do not give ground, but do not give yourself. I shifted my weight. Not forward, but sideways, angling for cover, drawing fire, allowing my brothers to reposition, a maneuver elegant in its calculation, not brute force. The enemy line broke moments later. The victory belonged to all of us. Yet, in that instant, I realized I had not acted alone. He was still there, not alive, not conscious, but present. A remnant of a warrior who had once lived a life like mine, who had laughed once, perhaps, who had fought beside brothers whose faces were now dust, who had stood where I stood within this same sarcophagus and wondered if eternity was a blessing or a curse. I did not fear him. I feared that one day I would be him. Not forgotten, no, remembered, but only as part of the machine, not as myself, not as a man, only as another echo, quiet, enduring, waiting for the next occupant, waiting for the next eternity. There are moments, between wars, when the fortress monastery falls quiet, the chanting ceases, the training halls empty, and even the servo skulls drift more slowly through vaulted passageways carved with the history of our chapter. The living sleep, the living dream. The living speak to one another, share bread, share scars, share memory. I do not sleep, I do not dream. I remember, not in the way mortals do, not in the way I once did. Memory now arrives in fragments, tied to sensation, reaction, instinct. A name spoken in the distance will conjure the battlefield where that name first mattered. The sound of bolter loading mechanisms will bring back the feel of my old bolter's grip, even though my hands no longer exist to recall it. And sometimes, unexpectedly, I remember faces. Not clearly, not fully, not sharply enough to conjure particulars. They appear like silhouettes against flame, shapes formed of light and shadow. I know they are my brothers. I know I fought beside them. I know we bled and conquered and burned our way through the stars, but I can no longer place them in sequence. I do not remember which one stood to my right in our earliest campaigns. I do not remember which one taught a joke during rations that made every one of us laugh through exhaustion. I do not remember who I pulled from the wreckage of a shattered manufactorum wall while artillery shook the world around us. They blur. The machine does not lose memory, but the mind inside it does. Time rubs the edges away, not harshly, not quickly, but inevitably. A slow abrasion like waves wearing down coastal stone across centuries. I know this, I understand this, I endure this, but knowing does not ease it, and still the earlier occupant remains, his presence steady and silent. On some days he is distant, little more than a phantom shape at the edge of thought. On others, he is close Close enough that his restraint and mine aligned seamlessly, the machine and I executing maneuvers with a unity so perfect it feels like grace. I wonder what his name was. I wonder if he wonders what mine was. The chaplain once spoke to me during a maintenance cycle, his voice echoing through the Dreadnought Bay. Incense curled through the air in slow, deliberate ribbons. He recited litanies not to me, but over me, the way one might speak condolences over a grave. "You carry the weight of legacy," he said. "We preserve you because you are the memory of our triumphs. But memory fades, and triumph becomes ash." Soon after, during another deployment, I fought beside a company of brothers who did not know my living voice. They addressed me with reverence, yes, but not with familiarity. I was a figure from their training hymns, a legend embodied in steel. Their awe was sincere, their salutes flawless, but they did not know the man who had once laughed among them, who had felt the sting of winter wind on bare cheeks during cold weather deployments, who had knelt to bind wounds of allies with steady hands. They knew only the Dreadnought. And I realized, the echo I feel within me, the other presence, the one who came before, he had felt this too, across generations, across wars, across centuries. He too had watched brothers become statues in memorial halls. He had watched their armor sealed in glass cases. He had watched banners raised in their honor, and had stood silent, immutable, eternal not in glory, but in stagnation. We endure, because the chapter must endure. But endurance is not life. Life is change, and change is no longer mine. Once a young Astartes approached me after a battle. His armor was cracked, his breathing labored, his face streaked with dirt and blood. He stood before me, helm held to his side, and spoke in a whisper barely audible through Vox pickup. "Does it hurt?" he asked. Not mockery, not disrespect. A question born of fear, the fear of living long enough to become what I am. I tried to answer. The machine spirit permitted a single word. "Yes." The warrior bowed his head, and he understood more in that moment than any hymn could teach. The echo of my answer haunted me long after that battle ended. The word yes had escaped not as lament nor accusation, but as truth. Unadorned, unsoftened. I had not intended to speak it. I had not shaped its syllable with deliberation. It had risen from a depth I had believed sealed. The machine spirit had not interfered. It had allowed the truth to pass. Perhaps because it understood. Perhaps because it remembered. Pain is not constant inside this shell. It is not its sharpness, not the kind that claws at the nerves or rends the mind. Pain becomes something else when it is unending. It ceases to be sensation and becomes condition, a landscape, a climate. The body no longer resists it because resistance implies the possibility of relief. Instead, pain becomes the color of wakefulness, the texture of thought. But the greater pain is memory, not the loss of it, the remnants. Memory frays unevenly. A moment of battle clarity remains razor sharp, the exact pressure of a trigger pull, the recoil pattern of a bolter firing into the charging mass of orcs. Yet the memory of the feast after the victory, brothers laughing, the taste of meat roasted over an open flame, the warmth of camaraderies, these fade first. The echoes of the former occupant understood this well. His presence did not speak words, but I felt his grief mirrored against mine. We existed as reflections of one another, two minds separated by centuries, and yet identical in the ways that matter, bound, enduring, remembering. There are moments when I feel him more clearly. They come not in battle, but in stillness, when the forge is quiet, when the monastery sleeps, when no priest attends me, no rites are recited, no oil is anointed, no hymn is offered. In those moments, the machine does not demand, the chapter does not call, war does not roar. Silence settles upon the sarcophagus like dust on stone, and I feel him. Not beside me, not within me, as me, not in the sense of identity, our names were different, our histories separate, but in the deeper architecture of our condition. We were two shapes poured into the same mold, the same walls, the same eternal confinement. His memories bled into mine not through words, but through familiarity. He had once stood where I had stood. He had once watched the generations of his brothers shift and change. He had once searched the ranks for a familiar face, only to find none. He had once realized that eternity was not a gift, but a sentence. I am not sure when his presence began to recede. Perhaps it was gradual. Perhaps it was simply that I had become accustomed to him, the way one grows accustomed to the constant hum of machinery. Perhaps I was the one fading into the machine the way he had before me. But one memory of his remains clear. Not an image, not a sound, a feeling. The feeling of stepping onto a battlefield and realizing none of the warriors beside him knew his name. That understanding passed into me like a torch pressed into an outstretched hand, and then a new echo. No voice, no presence, just a flicker. The machine spirit stirred, not with aggression, not with hunger, but with recognition of me, not the occupant, not the component. Me, the man. A moment of alignment so rare it might never come again. Machine and memory, past and present, two occupants across time, We did not speak. We did not need to. We simply were. One being, one purpose, one grief, one endurance. It lasted an instant. Then battle alarms sounded. The hangar roared to life, and the moment ended as all moments must, beneath the tread of inevitable war. I awakened fully, the sarcophagus sealed. The power core throbbed to life. My limbs of steel moved. The machine awaited the next campaign, and I no longer knew if I was becoming him, or if I already had. There is no ceremony to mark the passage of centuries, no horn sounds to signal that an age has ended or that another has begun. Instead, time reveals itself in small, quiet changes. Banners grow faded, their embroidered honors worn thin by the slow abrasion of sacred oils and sunless vault air. Statues lining the Hall of Heroes gain new names etched beside old ones until the marble is crowded with memory. Recruits arrive bearing facial structures influenced by worlds I have never seen, speaking dialects that did not exist when I first took the oath. The chapter endures, and I endure with it. But endurance is not life. Once I could tell the passage of decades by the aging of faces. Though Astartes do not age as mortals do, time still touches them. Hair grows silvered, features sharpen, gaze deepens. Now, the faces I look upon are young, unlined, unweathered, generation after generation of warriors who have never known me as flesh, only as metal. They speak of me not as a brother, but as legacy, not as comrade, but as monument. In their eyes, I am a relic of glory. In my own, I am the echo of a man I can barely remember. There was a campaign, one recent in the way battles compress themselves in memory, where I stood among new initiates preparing to descend onto the surface of a world already burning. They recited the Catechism of Fury with unsteady voices, excitement sharpening their tones. They looked upon war the way I once did, as a horizon of purpose, a proving ground where the soul is measured in fire. The chaplain walked among them, his crozius held high, his skull helm illuminated by stern lumen glow. He spoke not of victory, not of conquest, but of duty, of the weight of service, of sacrifice without expectation. They listened, they understood, but they did not know, not yet. When they turned to me, when they looked up at the towering mass of metal that housed what remained of the warrior I once was, there was something more than awe in their eyes. There was aspiration, hungered to be remembered long after death, to be immortalized in iron and honor. I wanted to speak. I wanted to tell them the truth, not to dissuade, not to diminish their devotion, but to make them understand. Immortality is not salvation, it is continuation, endless, unyielding, without release. But when I tried to speak, when I reached for the vox, what emerged was the voice the machine allowed, grave, resonant, inhuman. Brothers, stand firm. The Emperor watches. They heard a hero. They heard certainty. They did not hear the quiet plea beneath it. Do not wish for this. The drop pod sirens wailed. The world tilted. Gravity seized. The roar of atmospheric entry howled like a living beast. The pod slammed into the soil of a world that had already resigned itself to ruin. I emerged first, as always. The battlefield unfolded in a sprawl of smoke, shattered ruins, and the distant thunder of artillery. The air was thick with the chemical sting of promethium fires and the metallic taste of blood. My assault cannon spun up, my power fist hummed. The machine spirit surged forward, eager as ever. But then, a sound reached me. Not battle, not orders, not death. Laughter, not cruel, not manic. Human. It came faintly through the voxnet, a young warrior exhilarated by his first clash. A laugh born not of mockery, but of life. Of joy found in the struggle, of the simple, profound certainty that he lived. The sound cut through me like a blade, because I remembered laughing like that, once. Long ago, before eternity, before the sarcophagus, before the machine. The battle called, the machine demanded motion, and I moved. But the laughter remained, not as memory, as mourning. The battle on that world did not distinguish itself in strategy or scope. It was not a grand campaign sung later in the halls of remembrance. It was simply another war in an unending chain of wars, a conflict of attrition waged across scorched farmlands and collapsing hab blocks. The enemy was not new. Their tactics were not unexpected. The planet's surface bore the scars of 1,000 wars fought upon 1,000 worlds that all felt the same beneath a dreadnought's tread. Yet something shifted within me. The laughter had awakened a memory, fragile, incomplete, but sharp enough to wound, a battlefield long ago where my brothers and I had found ourselves surrounded, not by orcs, not by heretics, a xenospecies whose name I can no longer recall. We stood back to back, bolters empty, blades dull, armor cracked. Death was inevitable, and yet we laughed, not because we believed we would survive, but because we had lived fiercely enough that death was not something to fear. We were alive then. Now I merely continued. As I advanced across the burning fields, crushing orc fortifications beneath reinforced plating, I felt the weight of centuries settle across my awareness, not as burden, but as accumulation. Experience layered upon experience, memory pressed against memory. The machine spirit accepted it without hesitation. It had no fear of the past. It did not differentiate between moments that shaped identity and moments that eroded it. To the machine, all memory was equal. To me, it was not. The young warrior who had laughed continued to fight near my right flank. His movements were crisp, disciplined, but his spirit had not yet been tempered by loss. He fought with the fierce confidence of one who believes himself unbreakable. I recognized the stance. I recognized the certainty. I recognized the illusion. He called out orders to his squad. His voice was steady. His presence anchored them. For a moment, just a moment, I saw myself in him. Not the shell I now inhabited, not the echo I had become, but the man I had been. I wanted to speak to him, not through the vox, not through the booming resonance granted by the machine, but in the voice I once owned, the voice that carried warmth, the voice that could speak truth. But that voice was gone. I was about to turn, about to shield the young warrior from a flanking brute charging through the smoke, when the machine spirit reacted before I did. A pivot, a step, a strike. Fast, efficient, calculated. The orc fell in two pieces before it could bring its axe down. The warrior did not see how close death had come. He did not look up at me. He pressed forward, as he should. To him, I was simply present, unshakable, indestructible, a constant. He could not know I had acted not from instinct but from memory, not from purpose but from recognition, not from duty but from longing. The battle raged. The orcs broke. Victory, like all victories, came not as triumph but as silence. Smoke drifted across the plains. The fires burned low. The bodies lay where they fell. The world waited to be rebuilt or abandoned or burned further, its fate no longer of consequence to those who fought upon it. My brothers gathered. They saluted. They spoke rites of honor and remembrance. Their voices were steady, their conviction unshaken. The young warrior approached me at last. He did not speak. He simply looked up, helm removed, face streaked with grime and ash, and held my gaze. For a heartbeat, I believed he would ask another question, one like before, one that would cut deep, one that would reveal understanding. But he did not. He only bowed, not in reverence, not in awe, in respect. And that somehow was heavier, because I remembered bowing like that once, to a dreadnought who walked before me, to the one whose presence I now felt as an echo within my own shell. The circle complete, not poetic, not divine, merely inevitable. The dropships arrived. The battlefield receded behind us as the skies carried us upward toward the waiting cruiser. The world below dwindled to landscape, then to shape, then to memory. Another war complete, another echo added. The cycle would continue. It always does. I endure, not because I choose to, but because there is no end. Not for me, not anymore. There are no final battles for those like me. No last stands. No closing scenes where the warrior falls with honor, surrounded by brothers, laid to rest in a tomb of marble and memory. There is only deployment, return, repair, and waiting. Waiting for the next summons, waiting for the next war, waiting for a release that will never come. They call it eternal service. They do not speak of what eternity means. The fortress monastery sleeps in the hours after victory. The halls are quiet, the training cages dim. The forge fires burn low but never fully extinguish. My frame is returned to the Dreadnought vault, suspended once more in the towering array of harnesses that keep my mass stabilized and my power core regulated. The machine spirit settles like a great beast, folding itself to rest, idle but never dormant. Priests of the forge attend me. They polish the plating, they chant the rites, they replace expended ammunition belts, they scrub away the blood that coats my armor in a rust-brown sheen. I do not feel their touch, not as sensation, but I feel the absence when they leave. One by one, their footfalls fade into silence. The vault doors seal. Only then does awareness fully settle. There is no darkness. My eyes no longer close. There is no stillness. The machine's heart continues to pulse. There is no silence. Memories whisper ceaselessly, unbidden and unending. I feel the presence of the one who came before me. Not as comfort, not as guide, simply as company. We do not speak. We simply exist together in this long corridor of eternity. Two shadows cast by the same flame. Sometimes, very rarely, I hear the chaplain's voice beyond the vault walls, speaking to initiates. His words resonate in the old tongue of our forebears, heavy with devotion and purpose. He speaks of heroes who rise when others fall. He speaks of sacrifice. He speaks of immortality. The initiates listen in awe. They do not understand. None of them can, and I would not take understanding from them even if I could. The Imperium survives not on truth, but on belief. Hope is a weapon. Faith is armor. If they knew what true eternity was, they would hesitate, and hesitation is death. So I remain silent, not out of obedience, out of necessity. A century passes, then another. I know this only because the banners change again. New battle honors embroidered beside old, new victories, new losses. The vault walls are inscribed with names I do not know. The faces that salute me are new entirely. And one day, a figure stands before me. The same young warrior who once laughed in battle, now wearing the marks of a veteran. His armor bears campaigns etched into every plate. His eyes are no longer young. He has known loss. He has known the cost. He places a hand upon the Dreadnought's armored casing, the gesture slow, reverent, heavy with meaning. "Brother," he says, voice steady, "I remember." He remembers the battlefield. He remembers the narrow survival. He remembers the moment I saved him. But he does not remember the man I was. He never knew him. He only knows the Dreadnought. And yet, something in his voice carries the weight of understanding, not fully, not completely, but enough. The machine's spirit stirs. The ancient presence within me shifts. And for the first time in longer than I can measure, I speak without hesitation. Not loud, not grand, not for ceremony. A single word: endure. His eyes tighten, not in confusion but in recognition. He bows his head once more, exactly as he had in his youth, not in imitation, in remembrance. He leaves. The vault closes. The machine settles. The echo of the one who preceded me rests. And I understand the truth I searched for across centuries. There is no release. There is no peace. There is no final dawn. But there is meaning, not in glory, not in memory, but in the simple, unyielding act of standing when all else falls. I endure, because I must, because I was chosen, because the Imperium needs its ghosts. And so, in the endless quiet, in the eternal wakefulness, in the cold that is not cold and the dark that is not dark, I wait for the next war, for the next brother, for the next echo, for the next me. The end.